Despite the catastrophic death toll it has inflicted, Israel is losing on the ground and in the court of public opinion. There's no way that this ends that doesn't leave Israel a pariah state with occupation and apartheid on borrowed time, and they know it. So they're doing everything they can. Desperate acts of aggression to provoke a wider conflict with Lebanon, with Iran, with anybody, to draw in the US, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. And as Yemen shows, Butcher Biden is reporting for duty. With Europe's proud genocide by his side, they are the ones who have enabled the continuation of Israeli terror. Without them, it would already be over. So take note, Butcher Biden. The ancestors of the Ireland that you claim to be from disown you. Keep our country out of your mouth. And as for von der Leyen and genocidal Germany, with your words and deeds supporting Israel in the ICJ, not in our name. The people of Europe stand with Palestine and with South Africa.
Under international law, we have an obligation to prevent genocide taking place. The EU has done nothing to stop the genocide taking place. The Houthis have done something about it, and by interfering with shipping, facilitating the genocide. How, in God's name, how can you just turn a blind eye to the truth of what's really happening? The Houthis have killed nobody with the interference in the ships. Israel has killed 30,000, and you're giving out about the Houthis who've killed nobody. You're putting shipping before the lives of Palestinians. You just don't give a damn about the Palestinian lives, and that's the truth of the matter. And you're worried about spillover in international law. Israel is bombing Lebanon, is bombing Syria, is bombing Gaza, and you're worried about the Yemenis interfering with ships because there's money being lost over it. Is it a joke? Honestly, I just don't understand how you can take this perspective. What he's going to do about it? Is he ever going to tell Israel that they're committing a genocide? Because if this is not a genocide that's going on in Gaza, then what would you call it? That's one of my questions to you. I want you to know, what would you call what's going on in Gaza if it's not a genocide? And my other question to you is, if right now the US and UK are bombing cities in Yemen, do you think that's against the UN Charter? Because I do. Please tell me. It might be okay with the international rules-based order that just make up as you go along, but it is not okay with the UN Charter. Give us a break.
Thank you for agreeing to speak on the show, because I've seen some clips that you've put out on social media of what you've been saying in the Parliament there, and we've seen in this country, we see lots of people demonstrating against what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine. But we're not seeing much of the same in Parliament. Parliament's not doing that for us here. What's the experience of you're getting in the European Union? I mean, is Parliament more supportive of Palestine, do you think, than for example, the government, the Parliament here in Britain?
No, I would say it's pretty similar in that the gulf that you're experiencing in Britain between the people in power, regardless of whether they're Labour or Tories or whatever, and the mass of the people who are appalled at what they're looking at, which is basically the live streaming of genocide, that gulf is pretty much the same in the European Parliament as well. We've had millions on the streets in cities all over Europe, and yet the European Parliament in Strasbourg last week passed a motion which was celebrated and applauded by the Israeli authorities as vindicating their position, in that they said there should be a ceasefire only provided that the hostages were released and Hamas dismantled, which basically means carry on the genocide. We've seen a whole number of member states side with Israel, and the people of Europe are tearing their hair out. They cannot believe that this so-called European Union of values and democracy and international law is basically complicit in it. It's been a real game changer for a lot of people in terms of how they view the European Union.
It's going on for over 100 days now, and in the early days, when we were discussing it in the plenary in Strasbourg, the vast majority of the MEPs only wanted a temporary ceasefire or a humanitarian ceasefire, which is also temporary. And a humanitarian ceasefire was never designed to be anything other than an opportunity for organizations to get in some aid of sorts to certain parts at certain times, but it meant that the bombing wouldn't stop. And a temporary ceasefire was really just designed to try and do deals with Hamas to get the hostages out. It was never about stopping the genocide that was taking place. Now, the MEPs, some of them have become a bit embarrassed by their position, especially because I'd say their people at home are dismayed at their position, because the vast majority, I would say well over 90% of the people of Europe are horrified at watching a genocide on their telephones, because this is the first genocide that they've seen on live on their phones. And they just cannot believe how horrific war can be. Now, all wars have been horrific, only this time they're seeing it on their mobile phones. And so what's going on in the House of Commons? The general gist of it isn't that much different from the European Parliament. And our heart does go out to the British people. And I was reminded only yesterday of a famous comment by Noam Chomsky 25 years ago, when he was asked about democracy in the US and the electoral process. And he says, look what he said. In America, he says, we have one party, he says, it's called the Business Party. And he says there's two factions to it. He says one of them is called Republican, the other is called Democrat. And he says, but there's very little difference between them. Well, in Britain, you have one party, and it seems to be called, it's a war party. And you have a faction called Tory, and you have a faction called Labour. And whether Sunak or whether Starmer is in power, they're going to support US empire. They're going to support the military-industrial complex, and the lives of people in countries like Gaza or other Muslim countries won't mean a whole lot to them. They will follow suit, and that's. I mean, I really feel. I mean, listen, God knows we don't have a great choice in Ireland either. But my God, the Americans have a choice between Trump and Biden, and the British people have a choice between Starmer and Sunak. Mother of God, God help us.
Yeah, I mean, just on the Ireland issue, I mean, we've seen people from Ireland come to the demonstrations here, from Sinn Féin, mostly the people speaking, very, very fiery and against what's going on, and speaking out against Israel. But what's Ireland as a whole been like on this? Because I would expect Ireland and the history of Ireland to be speaking out strongly against this kind of ethnic cleansing, effectively, of a group. I mean, what's your take on the parties there, politicians in Ireland?
Generally speaking, that will be what is happening has shocked people beyond belief. It's made them challenge their whole relationship with the European Union. A lot of people, believe it or not, actually believe the EU propaganda that it was a force for good and peace in the world. And yet they see the likes of Ursula von der Leyen standing with Israel as it commits a genocide, and they're deeply shocked. So the coverage in the media would be, you know, people get it. Everybody in Ireland gets what's going on because of our history. We definitely do. So it's easy, I suppose, to be pro-Palestine in Ireland for sure. But the media have been disappointing. They pose it as a two sides way, in some sort of a weird way that they think it's about to bring balance. I mean, anybody who talks about the Israel-Hamas war, that's not balance. That's not true. This is, violence and terror inflicted on a civilian population. It's not a war, so they've been too much at doing that two sides, but they would be more challenging of the Zionist rhetoric, I suppose, when it comes on, but not enough. They've platformed the US authorities or the Israeli authorities. They haven't called out the role of the US. Our right-wing parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are in government with the Greens. You know, they've I suppose, called for a ceasefire, yeah, but they haven't spearheaded it enough in the EU. There's been other countries, Belgium, Slovenia, Spain, haven't been bad. Ireland, as a former occupied country, could have been out there side by side with South Africa as a sort of glimmer of hope to countries that are firmly, I suppose, from the global north. We could have been that voice to break through, and it would have been hugely important. They're kind of wishy-washy about, yeah, well, we're looking to see what happened. We might join the case, but our Taoiseach has undermined South Africa's case previously, trying to play both sides. So, look, it's, I suppose, official Irish society. You wouldn't see what went on in Britain with the, I suppose, attacks on Jeremy Corbyn with ridiculous smears of anti-Semitism. I mean, anyone in Ireland being smeared by being called an anti-Semite because they criticised the Zionist project of Israel, that doesn't hold water in Ireland. You know, there's been people who've tried to sort of smear and say, oh, you're anti-Semitic. No one believes that. That's just water off a duck's back in Ireland. It does not stick. Nobody's convinced by that. So I suppose that's different. The demos have been huge. All of the opposition parties are very vocal in calling for serious action, diplomatic measures, a suspension of trade agreements, all of that stuff, boycott, you know. So there is, I suppose, a strong section of the opposition doing that. How they be in power, though? Don't know. Sinn Féin are still going to the White House to meet Butcher Biden. They're not even in government. They don't have to do that, and that's not going down well with a lot of people. For St. Patrick's Day, that is, I should have said. Yeah.
I mean, another thing that I noticed that's been going on is this hate speech discussion in the EU Parliament. Now, we've had in this country, we've had Tony Greenstein, I don't know if you know who he is, and Mick Napier in Scotland. They've both been arrested for terrorism charges for having said that they would support those defending Palestine. And it's been said that they were in support of Hamas and a terrorist organization. You've mentioned the anti-Semitism smears as well before. It seems they've moved on from using anti-Semitism smears to now saying you're a terrorist. Is that the sort of thing you anticipate the EU doing when it's talking about hate speech?
I think it's important in saying that in attempting to silence different views and demonize and downgrade them and cancelling people who challenge the system, one of the creeping authoritarianism moves that the EU is involved in is criminalising hate speech as an EU crime. And people should be very worried about that. Precisely your colleagues in Britain who've been imprisoned for Palestinian solidarity. This is the type of action that could end up being penalised. Legitimate political activity, decided what's right, what you can say, what you can't say, by people who have trounced the rights of women, of minorities, of groups like that, and they're dressing up this hate speech legislation as some attempt to sort of help minority groups when it's their economic policies that's fostered the very intolerance that society breeds in the first place. And now they want to criminalize people who speak against it. So, you know, it's supposed to be a hallmark of democracy, freedom of speech, but the EU obviously doesn't care about democracy.
You're both very refreshing in the sense that you tell the truth. You don't use fancy words when you can use proper meaty words that actually have meaning.
We don't know any big words,
but we do know some fancy ones.
But there's so many politicians we see. I mean, I've seen it around Westminster who kind of wear like what one of our people on the show calls pointy shoes and shiny suits. You know, they wear shiny suits and have pointy shoes on, who's speaking kind of gobbledygook and try and befuddle everyone to think that you have to be a particular way when you're a politician. You are both really different and refreshing and speak out, but you're sort of describing the other MPs and MEPs as being a bit like these shiny suited, pointy shoed people. How did you decide that you weren't going to be intimidated and become like those other lot? I mean, were you ever like that? Were you ever likely to have been compromised and become a bit pretentious?
No, well, I suppose we've both been in the Irish Parliament before, so we're kind of used to parliamentary life, and people who think that politicians are above the people, which is obviously total nonsense. There's also some people who are totally deluded and who think that as politicians they actually change things, when normally the people in power are dragged screaming and kicking into changing things as a result of organised community, trade union and mass action. But I suppose we were used to those type of people. The European Parliament's a bit of a different one, though, in that there would have been talk in the early years about us in the Irish Parliament that we didn't wear suits, we didn't dress up, mix hair wouldn't be typical of a male politician, etc., etc. But actually, in the European Parliament, depend all across the political groups, you could see people wearing jeans or a t-shirt, or they might have an Armani suit. Anything goes. It's very different. So the people who come here are people, we have former prime ministers, heads of armies, all sorts of people here. But then there's kind of young eco warriors selected from their political party or whatever. There's over 700. They're very much a mixed bag. And would we be intimidated by these former prime ministers and generals and all this? Absolutely not. We actually love taking them on. We've never felt subservient to anybody. We're all elected, we're all the same, and we've just as much right to have a voice as anyone else. There are definitely people here who sneer and make comments, particularly as Mick said, the sort of Putin puppets or Moscow calling and all this absolute rubbish. But they've become a lot more silent. The longer we're here, the quieter they're getting. We've earned our place as people who are two of the most best-known MEPs across Europe. Ironically, if there had been pan-European candidates, we'd probably handily get elected, which you wouldn't say for many of them. Probably easier than we'll get elected in Ireland, given how the media have treated us there. But yeah, I mean, we've earned our place for sure.
Yeah, I mean, listen, people actually thought in the early days, I mean, we're on the Security and Defence Committee and Foreign Affairs, as well as a few other ones, but they kind of thought they weren't used to people kind of challenging power and standing up to it. And there was efforts to kind of intimidate us in the early days, but I mean, we weren't really up for that much. And the bigger the fish that came in, I mean, we had Stoltenberg in front of us about twice a year over the last 4 years. We had the OPCW head in front of us, and we've had an awful lot of the big military wigs and also politicians from across the world. And the bigger the fish that came in, the more we liked it. And we didn't really understand how to stay silent and to be intimidated by him. Politicians like to put themselves on a pedestal, but we're not on any pedestal. We're very proud of the fact that we have strong links with the ordinary people, and we get on pretty well with them. And we don't have any false notions about ourselves. We don't take ourselves too serious, but we take our work very serious, and we'll be merciless with everybody.
Right. I really appreciate that. No, I just want to say before you go that Kevin Higgins passed away last year. He was on the show most weeks doing a poem. I just like to play a poem that he wrote and he recites on the show here, and then maybe you could speak a bit about Kevin, your memories of him. This is about Margaret Hodge, if you know who she is. She's an MP in East London, who's also a big Zionist.
The fucking dame is fucking furious and not fucking having it. Fucking up is fucking down. Fucking in is fucking out. Fucking master is fucking slave. Fucking Palestine is fucking never. Fucking Goliath is fucking David. Fucking catapult is fucking atom bomb. The fucking wall was fucking built to keep the fucking Arabs off the fucking land, fucking snatched, fucking fair, and fucking square. And if you lot dare say I spoke about the fucking House of Commons spitting words like fucking, or mention the fucking bust of fucking Lenin, I fucking bought and fucking placed in Islington Town fucking Hall when I was first elected fucking Queen. You'll be hearing from the fucking lawyer, my fucking hubby, our first night together. Sincerely fucking yours, Mark.
Brilliant.
There you go. I mean, he certainly got to the point, didn't he, Kevin?
How could you answer or say anything after that? It was amazing, and it just, I suppose, summarized Kevin's sharp wit, his great ability to sort of summarize people and situations in a really kind of sarcastic but cutting and deeply political way. Amazing, a terrible loss, you know. And we were minded, actually, when you got in contact with us, your contact with us reminded us of Kevin. It was his anniversary there a week or two ago. A big loss to Irish poetry and to left-wing poetry, I think.
Yeah, we always liked his irreverence.
Yeah, he would have had some heyday out with this stuff. I think Ursula von der Leyen would have been a feature of many of his poems now. He got asked for Stammer as well. My God, he'd be very, very busy, I think.
For some reason, with the likes of von der Leyen and Starmer and Biden and the whole of them around, I mean, a lot of the leading political figures have become such easy picking. I mean, they're such shams, you know.
Yeah, it's a shame he's not here to do that, but you're doing what you're doing is in the spirit of him. You're really telling them as it is out there, and I really appreciate you coming on and all you're doing, and I just want to let people know that you've got a podcast every week where you talk about what's happening in the Parliament there. So if you can get onto Clare or Mick's Twitter account, you can probably find it through there.
Yeah, it's called at I4C Trouble. At I4C Trouble. So I4C is the letter I, number 4, and the letter C. I4, that's Independence for Change is the name of our grouping, but it's also I4C Trouble with Daly and Wallace. But it's our take on the European Union. So if people in Britain think that you're the only ones with a rotten political leadership, and if there's people pining to get back into the EU, you could have a listen and you might think differently.
Yes, we don't hide from the fact that the political process everywhere leaves a lot to be desired. Politics disappoints, politicians disappoint, but if you listen to our podcast, we'll actually tell you what's really happening out here, and you might find it interesting.
Or scary.
No, I think it's good. I've listened to a couple of them. It's good. Thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with all you're doing. And
thanks, Chris. But on you, lovely to see you again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See ya.